This is the cot that I made about a year ago from solid beech. It took me about 6 days to build it. Unfortunately though, it's never been slept in. Well, that's not strictly true. I have caught Mickey sleeping in there a few times, but baby Brown refuses to sleep in it, preferring instead to sleep in our bed with us. So that means that this cot is just taking up valuable space. I don't want to give it away or sell it, because even though I feel I built it to a high standard with all of the necessary safety regulations in mind, the idea of somebody else's baby sleeping in it feels like a risk that I'm just not willing to take. And the idea of chopping it all up and using it as firewood seems very wasteful. So instead, I'm going to try and repurpose it. Baby Brown needs a wardrobe, but I don't want to build a kid's wardrobe. I want to build a full-size double wardrobe. I don't see the point in making something that will last 5 years. I'd rather make something that can grow old with him. There's a lot of reusable wood here. Trying to get the drawer bottom off proved trickier than expected, and this is why I like gluing on my drawer bottoms. I'll use these slats to make some slatted shelves. I made a simple jig to hold the slats so that I can cut some new mortises in the ends. And then a bit of maths to figure out the spacings. This piece I'm nailing to the workbench is sacrificial. It's just a stop that will allow me to hold the workpieces on the edge of the bench. I set up my belt sander so that I can add a chamfer to the end of each slat, which will just create a bit of a shadow line where the slats butt together. I thought it would look nicer that way. And then I can get these assembled. I ended up with 4 shelves in total. The sides of these shelves will never be seen later, so I'm adding some screws just to reinforce those front pieces. I've got an abundance of MDF at the moment, mainly because I did some sponsorships with an MDF company a while back. And each time I did one, I asked for an extra sheet just to be on the safe side in case I made any mistakes. So I'm going to use some 18mm for the carcass. I'm going to need 2 side panels, a centre panel, and also a top, middle and bottom panel. And then later some doors too. And I ended up using about 2.5 sheets, I think, in total. Because I'm working with wood salvaged from the cot, I'm building this without plans, just making it up as I go along. So for example, the width of each compartment on the wardrobe is going to be dictated by those slatted shelves that I've made. I want to offset the shelves from the back of the unit by around 12mm, as I'll be adding a back panel later. I'm using masking tape so that I can prime all the MDF without cutting it around where the shelves will be. And I'm using an acrylic primer. Once dry, I'm painting the inside with a white satin wood paint to keep things inside nice and bright. To make the main assembly glue up easier, which will be done later, I'll get these dominoes glued in now. And the dominoes that will be supporting the slatted shelves needed to be cut down. I've still got loads of beech left and I want to use as much of this as I can. So first I'm going to use one of these pieces to make a clothes hanging rail. After cutting this piece square, I found the centre, mounted it on the lathe, and used my roughing gouge to get it round. I cleaned it up a bit with the spindle gouge, and then used a carbide scraper to get a nice smooth finish. The spindle measured about 36.5mm, and I don't have a drill bit of that size, so I'm going to turn some tenons on the end down to 35mm. And then I wiped on a couple of coats of water-based varnish. I tried to keep this as thick as possible to avoid any risk of it bending over time, and I think that'll do the job. I used a spray varnish to finish the slatted shelves, and then finally I can start getting this assembled. It seemed to be going well until I realised it wasn't going together square, so things got a little tense as I messed around getting a clamp on diagonally to pull it into square before the glue went off. Then I needed to do a quick dry assembly for the next stage of the glue up just to mark up the positions for the final mortises. I'm also going to need to make some little mounting plates to hold the hanging rail, which I could cut out of the spare pieces of beech. And I'll mount these using some nice brass screws. The next stage of the glue up went really smoothly. All of the weight from this piece in the centre is going to be bearing down onto this 18mm shelf. And I'm going to be putting some drawers in the bottom here, so this doesn't necessarily need a back panel for aesthetic reasons, but I'm going to add one just for strength. A piece of 9mm packaging ply will do for the back panel. And then I can get all of the outside edges and faces prepared and primed. From this plywood box that formed the base of the cot, I should be able to get enough material to make my drawer sides. And yet another piece of packaging ply can be used to make my drawer bottoms. With all of the denibbing done, I'm going to try and mix up a specific paint colour using a mixture of my workshop green paint, a little bit of blue emulsion, and some varnish to add a bit of sheen and extra protection. I ended up with this. So this is the piece of furniture that I'm hoping to match the colour of, and this is the colour I've just mixed up on a scrap of plywood, and I think that's going to be fine. I want to add a back panel here as well, but because I used a 9mm rebate bit when I cut this section here, 9 plus 9 equals 18, and this shelf here is 18mm thick, meaning if I run the rebate bit around here, I'm not going to have any material left. I've got this router bit here though, which has a bigger bearing on it, so I'm going to see if I can swap them over. In hindsight, I should have used this bigger bearing for the previous back panel too, as that would have left more material, but something is better than nothing. Then I could just chisel away the areas that the router couldn't reach. I had this piece of 6mm MDF, and once I'd cut it to size and primed and painted it, I took it inside the house so that I could fit it later on, mainly because this unit is going to be difficult to move once the back panel is fitted. Now I can measure up to cut my doors. And I popped to the shed to see if I had any cup hinges, and I did, which is great, but these will come back to haunt me later on. I measure in 22.5mm from the edge and drill out a 35mm hole with a Forstner bit. And now I can start applying some of that paint. and the mounts for the hinges get fitted with the screw holes 37mm from the front edge. Fitting those hinges was an absolute nightmare. It took me way longer than expected. I just couldn't get them all aligned, and then I realised my mistake. Some of the hinges that I was using have this kink in the arm here, meaning that I think these are inset hinges, and I had assumed that all of the hinges that I had were overlay. And that means I'm one hinge short, which is annoying, but I'll sort that out later. I want to use the rest of the beech to make a leg base and also some handles for the wardrobe. So I'll start by cutting some feet. And I'm going to add a taper to these. And then these pieces are going to be perfect for the apron rails. And that all gets put together with some more dominoes. Here I'm just measuring from corner to corner to make sure the leg base is square. I've got some of this teak wax. Usually I try to avoid adding an orange colour to pale wood like this, but I quite like the orange colour against this green colour, so I wanted to try and match the teak veneer on these drawer fronts. Right, I've got a problem. I designed my leg base so that it would be long enough to support the weight of the side panels, but I must have mismeasured or miscut something, because when I offered it up it was ever so slightly protruding on both sides. And the solution I've come up with, which is a little bit crude, is just to trim 7mm off the width of each leg. And I've got my guide rail clamped in place underneath so it's nice and secure. And I've got a piece of plywood here just supporting the rail so that it doesn't rock. I took this cut in multiple passes to get to full depth, but it actually worked out really well. Now, with a little bit of luck, yeah, that'll be fine. These screws will never be seen as they'll be hidden by the drawers. Using these thicker pieces, I'm going to make some chunky D-shaped handles for the wardrobe doors. And I want to taper these too, so I'm going to do that by angling the table on the bandsaw. It took quite a lot of time to refine the shapes of these, but eventually they matched pretty well. Now for a final bit of fun. Baby Brown likes tractors and helicopters, so I'm going to have a go at making some drawer handles. These will be far from being works of art, but I reckon he'll like them, and they'll be replaceable, so when he's older we can easily swap them out for something else. The wardrobe was pretty heavy by this point, and I needed some help lifting it into the house. I'm going to nail the back panel on, no glue so that it's easily removable if we ever need to move it around. And I'm going to use the old hot glue trick to get these drawer fronts positioned. And some 2mm glazing packers to space them apart. And after hanging the doors, all that was left to do was to fit the handles.